right, welcome back to Faith Infused Leadership. I am your co-host, Meredith Banka, and I am here with your host, Debbie Heiser, who is the founder of Three Vines Consulting, and she has brought an incredibly valuable guest with her today, and I'm going to let Debbie make the introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith, and welcome everyone. I want to introduce Georgia Simmons, who is just a wonderful leader and somebody with a vast amount of experience and knowledge about what it takes to be a successful leader. And I am lucky enough to call her friend, and I also look to her as a mentor, both professionally and personally. So Georgia, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, Georgia, it's so great to have you here. And Debbie, when she introduced us just today, she shared with me that you have a really interesting background when it comes to leadership. So maybe you can just give us the quick synopsis of your experience as a leader.
Okay, well, it started 40 plus years ago. So I've been in the retail industry for over 40 years. And I went to college and graduated with a merchandising degree and started on an executive training program. Now, while in college and high school, I was always very active in extracurricular activities and always ended up being the captain, the president, and I didn't know why. And I wouldn't have considered it leadership at that point because I didn't know what the word meant. So, and through my career, I started out as an assistant buyer, moved to the job I wanted the most, which was being a buyer. I couldn't wait to be a buyer. But also remember 40 years ago, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the internet. We didn't even have calculators. We had to figure all our margins on margin wheels. And we used adding machines and comptometers and things that probably most of you have never heard of. So it goes way back. And although the technology has rapidly changed over the decades, the basics of leadership have not. And I think that's the important thing to remember. So I was fortunate enough to be in the women's apparel industry, being able to merchandise, design, create, understand the customer, and move up through the ranks. And so over my career, I have been a buyer, a merchandise manager, a vice president, an EVP, a CEO for a time, which was not my thing. I really didn't like being CEO. So I went back to being president and being able to focus on what I did well. And I think that's something leaders need to know too. You can get over promoted to a place where your skill set isn't as strong as it was. And therefore, you need to know that about yourself and be able to admit those things. So I've had a long career. I've done men's, children's, women's, cosmetics, jewelry. There's probably an area that I haven't touched. But no matter what the industry is, I think the key is what kind of leader do you want to be? And that really is important. There are many different types of leaders. All leaders, we come with our own personalities, our own skill set, our own talents. But how we become a leader and the kind of leader that we want to be depends on us. And there's lots to learn over the years and all the steps.
So one of the things you said, I think that I find the most interesting, because I imagine that a lot of the folks that tune into this show identify with it, is that you just kept finding yourself in these positions of leadership, but you didn't even consider it leadership. And, you know, as someone who's also had that experience, I almost had the reality of like, why does this keep happening to me? Why does this keep happening to me? And so I'd love to hear from you. At what point did you step into your leadership? Did you recognize that and really step into that role?
I think I was already a vice president and working for Spiegel Catalog at the time, which was owned by a huge conglomerate in Germany called Otto Grisson. And they were $16 billion, and they were the largest direct mail order to consumers, which is the place we were all moving, which we're there now through the internet and all of that. We purchased a company out of bankruptcy, and I was sent to New York to get them on the straight and narrow and be able to get them profitable and turn the company around. And I went there as an executive vice president. First of all, understanding that responsibility and accountability was great, but also really understanding how you take bankrupt mentality and turn it into successful teams that believe in themselves again was the first time that I really realized that what I had to offer was really important, and how I had to work around to make sure that these people could be inspired and they could be happy with what they did and they could be proud of what they did and they could see their own rewards. And that's when it clicked. But it was many years into my career before it truly clicked.
Sure, sure. And so as that happened for you, um, did you develop like a knowledge of certain skills or of certain components of leadership that you believe are important?
Yes, I really believed in critical thinking and I started studying it, studying how to not be emotional, how to be objective, how to take data and facts to make decisions, how to communicate that to teams of people, how to inspire teams, and putting all those together and making them accountable and listening to them. No leader has all the right answers. No leader probably has many of the answers. It comes from the people that you work with. And you have to be open-minded enough to listen, take what they say, and decide how to make that work. And if you can leave your ego at home and know that other people have great ideas, it also helps nurture them and develop loyalty. And watching their success brings great joy to me. So it was a big learning lesson for me and a big psychological lesson that was really, really important. I was pretty skilled in strategic planning, but I don't think I was as skilled in critical thinking.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, Debbie, because we've talked about that too. You know, what skills in leadership do we find maybe are innate? Maybe some people tend to them a little bit more, but then there are some that are simply learned skills that every leader,
Absolutely.
you know, if you're presented with or finding yourself desiring leadership position, there are some things that you just got to learn. So don't you see that in your work, Debbie?
Absolutely. And I kind of want to back up too, because when I think about critical thinking, Meredith and Georgia, I think about too, it's also about being able to incorporate data that you're taking in about yourself. And I think something that you pointed out, Georgia, that I think happens to many people, and it may not be promoted to CEO, but they get promoted into these positions because they were good at the position they were doing and they realize they don't like it. And so I guess I would ask, when did you have that moment of, aha, I don't want to be the CEO, I want to be the president. That's what I enjoy doing. And how did you navigate that?
Well, probably not as well as I should have. Okay.
It's always better.
I think that when you take, I've always run the front end of the businesses I've been involved with. And I like running the front end. When you get involved in a CEO position, you're now dealing with the company in its entirety. So the back end, which is more infrastructure, the banks, you know, all of those things, I didn't really think I was qualified enough to do. And no matter how many nights I would read and study and whatever, and I also didn't like it. So, you know, I had to go to the board and my boss and say, you know, basically, this is not what I do well. And rather than make a mistake for the company, because we've made some mistakes, it really, whether that means I have to leave the company or whether that means I go back to a different position that I do well. So honesty and integrity is also a big deal.
And humility. That took courage and humility.
Well, it did. I mean, having to go back into that building and people saying, you know, ooh, what happened? And I said, this is what I'm good at. And just be comfortable with being honest about those things. So I think, you know, honesty and integrity, because at the end of the day, you have to live with yourself. And we all know the only thing we leave this world with is a reputation. So without honesty and integrity, and believing in yourself and having the confidence that I should be doing this versus that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things that I like what both of you are saying is I I have heard too many times from employees and from leaders that everyone needs to want their boss's job. Everyone, that's such a common mentality, right? That everyone needs to be the striver. And I know from my experience of managing teams of people, not everybody does, but that doesn't mean that they're not valuable. And so
Absolutely.
and it doesn't mean that they don't have growth opportunity, and it doesn't mean that they aren't looking for more. They just know themselves well enough to know that they don't want that next step up the ladder. And as leaders, I think that we have an opportunity to just simply be okay with that, and not have to push. Not everybody needs to want to be the CEO. That's okay.
That's really okay, actually. And I think the other thing is making sure that they're comfortable. I had buyers that were like the best in the country,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't want to be more than buyers. So then you need to compensate them and make sure they keep doing the job that they're doing and they feel motivated and
Mm-hmm.
inspired. And that's will bring you much more success than trying to force them into something that they're not good at management necessarily. They're not good at teaching and communicating to people, but they're excellent at the position they're in, which brings me to another key point. Put the right person in the right job.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's easier said than done, and you will make plenty of mistakes. Recognizing those mistakes early and being able to again, use your critical thinking. What does this person do best? What are they really qualified at doing? Is the company not for them, or the position you hired is not for them? And if
Mm-hmm.
they've got great skills and passion, find another place, another home in the corporation for them so they can succeed. Or you have to part ways.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's the reality of it, right? I think
Absolutely.
you're bringing the realism to the conversation that sometimes people aren't right for the culture, even though they have the skill set. And
Right.
sometimes they have the skill set and they're very happy where they are. And other times they're just in the wrong seat. But, on the right bus, if you will. So you mentioned earlier that one of the things that you found you had to learn was critical thinking. Was there another area of development for you as a leader that you had to step into as well?
I Well, I've had to step into learning that not everybody thinks the way that I do. When you start out in your career and you're climbing the ladder, many of those positions are kind of independent, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
responsible for yourself and maybe an assistant. And so you pretty much, as long as you live up to the vision and you live up to the profits and the goals, you're an independent player.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first went into management, I thought everybody thought the way I did. I had no idea that they really didn't when it came to business. So learning that and learning that the most important thing I could learn was to become an avid listener and watcher,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to know your people. You have to know who's on top of you, who you're building teams with, and your customers, no matter what product or what kind of company, or whether you're an entrepreneur or not. You have to know your people. Everybody is motivated by something different. Everybody, and it's not always money, and it is how you speak to them and it is how you encourage them. But when people and I've been told this over the years, you really need to get to know your boss. And I'm thinking, yes, of course. But what I really need to think about and know are the teams I'm building.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really critical. And you can only do that by listening.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Yeah, and really quick, Meredith, too,
yeah, go ahead.
when I think about listening, Georgia, one of the things that I know I appreciate about you is that you listen to your internal voice. And I know one of the things that's really important to you is giving back to the community. I saw that when you were president of the company that you were in. I see that now that you're retired. Tell us a little bit about when you realized giving back to the community was important and why you feel that that's important.
Um, I believe as any business, you have a responsibility to your community. because your people live in it. And your people need to be looked after. So I had the opportunity to really get involved in some charity work in New York City. And it was the Committee Concern for Children. And I was made Woman of the Year. And that really made me feel like it wasn't just my career, but I actually could accomplish something that made me feel even better. And so when I moved out here to Sandpoint from New York City, I looked at
That's
this.
another episode.
Yeah, no, you have to read my memoirs for that.
Yeah, right.
So when I moved out here, I realized that this community had a lot of needs. And my husband and I were always focused on children and healthcare. So for me, charitable work really became important in this small community because you have employees who need these services. And if you're hiring people into a community, you need to make sure that your healthcare is really good and the education is really good, or you're not moving your children here. So I was fortunate enough to be a founding board member on Panhandle Alliance for Education, and over the years, we have raised millions of dollars for the schools and grants. And today I sit on the Hospital Foundation Board with Ms. Heiser over here, who is president, and I'm vice president. And again, healthcare. What does the community need to stay healthy? And that actually made my transition from retirement easier. But also learning, again, different leadership skills in business, not different, but they have to be handled differently than when you work with volunteer boards, but the same applies.
So how are the two different? Because I also imagine that a lot of people that tune in are similar, that they're serving in their work as well as serving in their community. So what do you notice that's the biggest difference between the corporate and the nonprofit world?
The nonprofit world is made up of volunteers. And you have to understand that they're volunteering time and they have lives and jobs, and so their time is limited. So how you manage them and how they work with you really depends on the amount of time and passion they have. So you have to have patience, a passion for it, and perseverance. And not that you don't need that in a career, but again, how you finesse things is very different with a volunteer board than it is for a corporation.
And I heard you say a little bit earlier too, something that I like that I think is relevant here. You talked about looking at data and looking at numbers, information, and then crafting how you would need to communicate that information or decisions based on that information to a team of people. And I think that applies both in the corporate world and in the nonprofit world, but the way that you're going about doing that is probably a little different.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe talk a little bit about that. When you've got that data and that information and you need to communicate it as a leader, how do you approach that?
Well, I think you approach it when you're working with a team of people. And one of my loves about leadership is working with the people and absolutely building teams. So, but when you're, again, in the world where you're dealing with different, not only different personalities, but different skill sets and different positions at different companies, and having to want them to be there. And part of that goes into the interviewing process of being on a board. And we have a governance committee, and we had a governance committee at PAFE where, again, when you interview, it is about, why do you want to do this? What's your passion for? And like all interviews, not everybody is totally forthcoming, but it is key to know that you explain to them right up front, this is a working board. This is your time commitments. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. Here's our thought process. And again, having them want to do it. And then really the biggest problem is scheduling. Because, I know when I'm in the office that you're due at a certain time.
Sure.
And as a leader, I was always the first in and the last out. So what time they're supposed to be there, when you can have meetings scheduled, but having to get a large group of people together to not only come to regular meetings, but also for the volunteer work you need and whatever. So those things are really key.
I love being the first in and the last out.
Well, you got to set by example. I've been a believer in that. Plus, I believed in an open door policy. So I had to have time to do my own job. So I'd get in and get organized and, and then stay and wrap up and get ready for the next day. And with an open door policy, you have to be willing to let people in, but have to have rules. So my rules were, if you had a problem or a challenge, you had to come in with 3 solutions. I may not like any of them, but I want to know you thought about it. And that's how I get you to practice critical thinking. And I had, and if you were going to work for me, you had to know the 3 Ps: passion, patience, and perseverance. Because not all things are easy. We're not always successful, but you have to have passion with what you do. And my last one was the 3 Bs: be bright, be brief, and be gone.
That's great.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Debbie, did you have some more questions for Georgia?
I don't necessarily have questions related to business, but I guess, I guess it is. I guess the question I have is, what is one of the biggest ahas that you've had about moving into retirement? Because there's a large group of leaders that are getting ready to retire or have retired, and it is different than having a place to go to every day. So what has been one of the biggest key learnings you've had as you've retired?
It was tough. It was very difficult. I was used to a pretty regimented routine. I traveled a lot. I traveled 7 months out of the year. I knew exactly where I was going and what I was going to do. And I used to tell everybody, don't retire, because I had read this in some magazine, unless you have 40 things you think you want to do. And so I would say my first couple of years were really difficult in me finding what I really wanted to do. So philanthropy was one. I got into art, which I really enjoyed. I mean, my life was all about color and fashion. And so it became an outlet for me. And I actually got to spend some more time with my husband, which was fabulous. So, but it is a huge, after 40 plus years, it's a huge adjustment. Sure. And you have to know that transition, you can't sit there and wait for something to come to you. You have to make it happen. And so I'm through the worst. It's kind of like menopause. I'm through the worst.
Yet again, another episode.
Exactly. And but it is really eye-opening when you look back at it. So when Debbie invited me to do this, I really had to sit in my office. My husband and I have separate offices. I also have a do not disturb sign for my office and at home, but really had to think about what all these things really mean and how they affect people, and how you should think about yourself and your life and your integrity and your honesty. So it was really a nice reflection back. And I actually enjoyed getting prepared for this.
Good. Well, and I want to back you up a little bit too, because I'd like to kind of end on a little bit of a humorous note. And Georgia and I've had the opportunity to share a glass of wine here or there. And I've heard a lot of her stories of moving from Manhattan or New York City to Sandpoint, Idaho, which is a small town in northern Idaho, 60 miles basically from Montana, Washington, and Canada. And with the only store other than little small boutiques is a Walmart in town. And so I'd love to, because I think there's an important correlation here too between even when people change jobs or they change organizations, there's a big culture shift. And so keeping that in mind, like thinking about that culture shift, can you share like one story about you moving here and kind of the holy cow, I'm in a completely different place other than New York City?
First of all, my husband wanted to retire. He did no longer wanted to live in Chicago or Manhattan. And so I got this opportunity to come to Sandpoint, Idaho. I'd never lived west of the Mississippi, and I really didn't think I wanted to do it. But my husband fell in love immediately, and so I agreed. So I got here, and first of all, I couldn't believe you didn't have bellmen, you don't have taxis. Nobody delivers food, and everything's closed at 9. But I think my biggest revelation was I had to go to the grocery store. When you live in Manhattan, the aisles are about this big, and the carts are for single servings of things. I walked into Yolks, and I saw the bulk aisle, and there were flour bags bigger than me, and I was in shock. I then went around the grocery store, and I have my little basket looking for hopefully things I could find, Apodophilus milk and so on and so forth. And I get in line behind this couple, and they have 9 carts of dry goods. And I know that my eyes were as big as saucers, and the cashier says, "Sally, that'll be $897.46, which I will never forget." And she wrote her a check, and she didn't ask for ID. And I know I'm stunned. I know I'm standing there stunned. And she said, "Bye, Betty. See you in 6 months." So I come up next, and she checks me out with my yogurt, my Apodophilus milk, and I didn't know what to say. I was still in shock, and I said, "Betty, I'll see you tomorrow," and left the store. So, all these things of learning how to adjust to a small town and its environment, and the difference in the people, their beliefs, how they think was very, very different. And I had to adjust to that also. But I was pretty good. I had learned at this point to be pretty good to take in the lay of the land, sit back, don't make any snap judgments. Let's see how this rolls out, what's going to work for them, what isn't going to work for them. And because they were all afraid of me because I was from New York City. So, which never dawned on me, so that took a while to work through, but it was really a rewarding experience. And therefore, I'm retired here.
Which is awesome. And I think so relevant, right? As corporations have shifted and changed, even if we're not relocating, we are working with people that are from incredibly different backgrounds, cultures. Here we talk a lot about faith and people coming from different faiths. So I love ending on that story today, and want to thank you so much for being a guest of our show. So for this episode of Faith Infused Leadership, I want to have Debbie tell us, if you wanted to find out more information, where would you go to learn a little bit more about the work that we do?
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. I would suggest going out to my website, which is 3V as in Victor consulting.com. Follow us on iTunes, as well as on Facebook and Instagram. And hopefully in the coming year or two, I'm going to throw this out there. Georgia might hit me after this is over, but hopefully those memoirs that she was talking about will be on stands.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. I would definitely buy a copy.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. That's good. Okay, I'm going to hold you to that. Maybe.
Of course.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yes, it's been fun. All right. Well, for this episode of Faith Infused Leadership, I am your co-host, Meredith Banka, here with your host, Debbie Heiser, and we will see you all again the next time.